Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, we've got some interesting coverage and details about Joe Kent, who recently resigned this week as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. We'll have all those details coming up. And a good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand by checking out the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning is brought to you by Melissa Gott and her team over at The Law Group. We appreciate them for their continued support and encourage you to visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them coming up as we roll through this busy Thursday edition. The name Joe Kent has been in the news a lot over the last couple of days. Earlier this week, he officially resigned as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He was appointed to the position by President Donald Trump in this second administration and released a pretty scathing letter that he decided to publicly put out on his X account instead of dealing with this internally. And I got a couple of notes this week from individuals saying, Nick, why aren't you talking about this? Why haven't you jumped into this yet? Why aren't you talking about this? And I've always had this general practice when something like this happens, where out of the blue, you've got a guy who randomly decides to resign from the administration like this. There's always more to the story. So I decided that I was going to give it a couple of days. I was going to talk about it. Was originally planning on covering it on the show on Friday, but with all of the news that has unfolded over the last 24 hours or so, it is time to dig into it today because the FBI is apparently and has been for quite some time investigating Kent over leaking classified intel. This investigation, which we'll get into the details on as we roll through the program today, has been under this FBI probe for apparently quite some time, has been apparently pulled out of intel briefings, has not been part of intel briefings for quite some time because, well, the administration felt that there was a strong possibility that he was leaking classified information externally. And when you hear that and maybe saw those headlines late in the day yesterday, this whole story starts to make a lot more sense. I mean, doesn't it? This guy in his position is starting to have I don't know that his security clearance levels were revoked or anything like that, but he stops getting invited to meetings. Maybe he stops getting invited to various briefings that are taking place, as essentially getting shunned by the intelligence agencies here in the United States, and then decides he's going to resign in an extraordinary fashion. This is the letter that he released earlier this week, saying, President Trump, after much reflection, I've decided to resign from my position as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center effective today. This was on Tuesday. I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran poses no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Starting to sound like an episode of the Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson show. I support the values and the foreign policies that you campaigned on in 2016, 2020, and 2024, which you enacted in your first term. Until June of 2025, you understood that wars in the Middle East were a trap that robbed America of the precious lives of our patriots and depleted the wealth and prosperity of our nation. And I actually tend to agree with Kent on that point of these ongoing forever wars in the Middle East. In your first administration, you understood better than any modern president how to decisively apply military power without getting drawn into never-ending wars. You demonstrated this by killing Soleimani and defeating ISIS. Earlier in this administration, high-ranking Israeli officials and influential members of the American media deployed a misinformation campaign that wholly undermined your America First platform and sowed pro-war sentiments to encourage a war with Iran. This echo chamber was used to deceive you into believing that Iran posed an imminent threat to the United States, and that should you strike now, there was a clear path to a swift victory. This was a lie and is the same tactics that Israelis used to draw us into the disastrous Iraq war that cost our nation the lives of thousands of our best men and women. We cannot make this mistake again. As a veteran who deployed to combat 11 times and as a Gold Star husband who lost my beloved wife Sharon in a war manufactured by Israel, I cannot support sending the next generation off to fight and die in a war that serves no benefit to the American people nor justifies the costs of American lives. I pray that you will reflect upon what you are doing in Iran and who you are doing it for. The time for bold action is now. You can reverse course and chart a new path for our nation, or you can allow us to slip further towards decline and chaos. You hold the cards. It was an honor to serve in your administration and to serve our great nation. Signed, Joseph Kent, Director, National Counterterrorism Center. Now, just right off the top, regardless of whether Joe Kent feels strongly about these feelings or not, which presumably he does, the way in which he went about this, I have a major problem with. You can be critical of Israel. You can absolutely be critical of AIPAC. You can be critical of Benjamin Netanyahu and make the point and make the argument that in some cases the United States is being dog-walked by Israel. That is a fine opinion to have. That is something that I have no intention or interest of shutting down. I believe that if that's the opinion you have and you feel that way, have at it. It's not my place, not my business to say you shouldn't have that thought. However, I will note, going about it in the way that Joe Kent did with this letter, publishing it to social media, instead of dealing with this internally, is a really, really bad look. I mean, it just feels gross. Okay, you disagree with the administration and the war in Iran, which I think is a fair assessment. We've talked about it explicitly here on this program. I am not interested and will not be standing by President Donald Trump if he gets us into a forever war in the Middle East. I've already stated that. I have no problem stating it, and it's how I personally feel. There is something different, though, when you release this public statement as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center and do it in this manner. And so immediately when I saw this letter published, I guess it was Tuesday morning or midday on Tuesday, immediately my alarms started going off. Because you don't just release a letter like this for no reason. Excoriating your former boss, telling him that he made the wrong decision, that he is being misled, that he is being manipulated into doing things that he doesn't want to do. You just don't do that. Everybody has worked for somebody in the past that they've disagreed with, that they didn't like the way in which things were heading. And I would imagine that the vast majority of you didn't decide that you were going to send a company-wide email voicing your displeasure for your boss, calling your boss an idiot for not doing what you think should be done, because that's just not the way that you're supposed to operate as an adult. Now, if you want to sit down with your boss one-on-one and have a frank, maybe heated conversation about what's going on, I think that's great. If you're somebody that is willing to do that, knowing what the risks might be, I'd say have at it. That's completely your choice. I've had those conversations throughout my professional career. Never have I thought about doing something like this publicly. I mean, I was fired by Cumulus Media the better part of almost 2 years ago. Did you see my statement after I was terminated? I thank them for the opportunity to speak to the people of Wilmington for almost 3 years as the morning show host. I didn't slam my boss. I didn't slam the company I work for. I was livid. I was really annoyed in the way in which it went down. But there's a way that you handle this stuff, and then there's a way that you don't. And I feel very confident in my status that the way that Joe Kent immediately handled this off the bat caused me to have significant and serious doubts about where he really was with this entire thing. So it just went through the letter that Kent posted, decided social media was the best platform for him to get this off of his chest earlier this week. And then we learned last night that, in fact, he is now being investigated by the FBI. According to the article over at Fox News, the FBI is investigating former National Counterterrorism Center Director Joe Kent over allegations that he leaked classified information, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter. Well, this starts to make sense. All the pieces of the puzzle start to come together, because this letter was out of absolutely nowhere on Tuesday. Not that there hasn't been criticism of the Trump administration over the war. There absolutely has, and I think in large part for good reason, kind of laying out the groundwork for what we do not want to see as Americans with another forever war in the Middle East. But this whole thing just really starts to make sense when you read these details. The probe, according to Fox News, predates his departure from government. As you would imagine, Fox News and Kent, not Fox News, the FBI and Kent were both reached out to by Fox News, and and neither of them bothered to follow up or respond back. A senior administration official told Fox News Digital that Kent was, quote, a, quote, known leaker who had been cut out of intelligence briefings months before his resignation. While Fox News says it is unclear whether the FBI investigation is related to those concerns or a separate matter. So, the puzzle is now very clear. He decided that he was going to leak classified information because he likely disagreed with what the administration was doing. He decided that he was going to take it upon himself to deal with this situation, even though he's not the president of the United States. He wasn't elected by tens of millions of American people. He knew the right way. Joe Kent knew exactly the right way. And when he didn't get his way, he decided that he was going to start leaking. And as you would imagine, and I will say to this, props to the Trump administration for getting a handle on this stuff. I would argue one of the issues that caused the first Trump administration in large part to be very ineffective in a lot of the things that they were doing is that there were constant leaks. I mean, I remember vividly 16, 17, 18, 19. It's like every single day there was a new expose report by CNN or CBS or the New York Times or the Washington Post, one of these major publications across the United States with very serious internal information that had been leaked out of the Trump administration and given to one of these left-wing media outlets. It was happening, I swear, literally every single day. And it caused a lot of headache, it caused a lot of trouble, and a lot of major problems within the first Trump administration. And it seems that at least in this second go-around for Trump, that he has done a much better job of getting better people closer to him and making sure that low-level individuals that are left over from the previous administration don't have access to this information. But it would appear that Kent did have that access, which is no surprise. He was the director of the Center for Counterterrorism. You would assume that somebody with that stature, somebody with that title in that position would have access to some of the most classified information that is available from not only U.S. intelligence, but foreign intelligence anywhere across the world. And so this whole thing, at least from my vantage point right now, seems like the fact that he was probably tipped off that he was under an investigation, and that's why this situation unfolded. I mean, that is what comes to me logically. The rumor mill started a spinning. Somebody within the FBI said, hey, wink, wink, nod, nod, be careful. Something might be going on. At the same time, Kent had, according to FBI sources, told Fox News that he had been cut out of briefings now for months. So the writing potentially already on the wall with this. You add all of those factors up, and you can all of a sudden start seeing this thing with much more clarity. The whole thing begins to make sense. Again, the criticism that Kent levies about forever wars in the Middle East, sending our incredibly brave members of the U.S. military overseas to fight useless wars for 30 years, I'm in full agreement with that. I'm not interested in that either. And as of this point, as of right now, there's not a single boot on the ground in Iran. There is now complete and total air dominance by both the U.S. and Israel. Iran continues to deplete their missile supply, indiscriminately firing missiles throughout the Middle East. Almost every single day that goes by, another high-ranking leader within the Iranian military or Iranian government is being killed by either the United States or Israel with strategic airstrikes. Iran is not going to be able to hold on to this thing much longer. Now, we will, of course, continue to keep an eye on this as American citizens that were burned over some of the previous interventions that we had in the Middle East. I would argue you should be skeptical. I, myself, am skeptical of what's going on. I am not in full support of intervention within the Middle East. But for Joe Kent not only to make the accusations that the only reason we're doing this is because of Israel, but then to make the point that Iran poses no threat to the United States is just total nonsense. Iran is the largest state sponsor of terror anywhere in the world. And so if you want to argue they don't pose a threat to the United States because they can't physically shoot ballistic missiles from Iran to and hit the United States, that's not the full equation. We watched over the past couple of years millions upon millions of individuals cross into the United States from God knows where. And we have very strong intelligence sources that have said that there is a strong likelihood that there are pretty significant amounts of sleeper cells that are either directly from Iran or from one of Iran's various proxy terror groups that exists throughout the Middle East, Hezbollah, whoever else, that are in the United States. So to say that Iran poses no threat to the United States at all is something I refuse to believe. And actually, so did Joe Kent. Here's a post from him back January the 8th of the year 2020, where he tweeted at President Donald Trump, "We should not sit and wait for the next attack. Wipe Iran's ballistic capacity out and get our troops out of Iraq. They are the only targets now. No U.S. WIA, KIA is attributed to the professionalism for our military and the intel professionals, not Iranian resistance." So just back a couple of years ago, Joe Kent obviously thought that Iran was some level of threat to the United States. He said that we should, quote, wipe out Iran's ballistic capabilities, which is, by the way, what is going on right now. So even he himself is showing some level of lack of consistency with these statements, which is fine, I'll note, right? Opinions change. You're allowed to have an opinion and you're allowed to change it. But when you go completely scorched earth on this administration, which is what he did in this letter, when you were making statements like this back 6 years ago, it does seriously begin to beg the question, what the hell is behind this whole thing? And that's where I'm at right now. What is behind this whole thing? Predictably, with Joe Kent deciding that he is going to leave and resign his position within the National Counterterrorism Department within the federal government, well, immediately he jumped on over to Tucker Carlson, who, of course, has become a highly controversial figure on the right, who has spent the last couple of months attempting to go after Donald Trump and the MAGA base at every opportunity possible, shilling for the Qataris, shilling for the UAE, Carlson has lost an incredible amount of, at least from my vantage point, credibility over the last couple of years. And well, the fact that Joe Kent ran to him as the first interview, again, more and more pieces of this puzzle, more and more parts of this story are starting to make more sense. So here's from the Tucker Carlson show last night.
I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. How did you reach that conclusion?
I think this is key. I mean, this would be more challenging to explain had the Secretary of State, the President, and the Speaker of the House not come out and said that we conducted this attack at this time because the Israelis were about to do so. So that takes away the argument that there was an imminent threat, as in Iran was planning to attack us immediately. That just simply did not exist.
May I ask you to pause? Sure. And so I've heard people say that, and this just happened, but history has a way of getting rewritten in real time, and then you look back 10 or 15, 20, 25 years later, and no one seems to understand the things that you saw because they've been eliminated. Yeah. So I think it's important to stop and say, here's what we actually know. So I'd like now, if we could, just to play one of the statements that you alluded to, and that's from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And this was shortly after this war commenced. And he was explaining, as is his habit, in a thoughtful, precise way, why. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Okay, so that is his almost contemporaneous explanation, and it's not offhand. He reasons it out. He explains there's a logic chain there, and he says, we knew not that Iran was going to attack. He did not say that.
Right.
He said we knew that Israel was going to attack Iran, and in retaliation for those attacks by Israel against Iran, Iran might attack American forces. So the imminent threat that the Secretary of State is describing is not from Iran, it's from Israel.
Exactly. And I think this speaks to the broader issue. Who is in charge of our policy in the Middle East? Who is in charge of when we decide to go to war or not? In this case, with what the Secretary described, and later on the President, later on the Speaker of the House, and the way the events played out, the Israelis drove the decision to take this action, which we knew would...
Now, I just have to stop Joe Kent and his complete garbage and nonsense right here. Not for 1 second do I believe that Donald Trump is not capable of making decisions himself. If there is one thing I can say confidently about Donald Trump, he is an incredibly stubborn individual. He is an incredibly strong-willed individual. If he doesn't want to do something, he won't do it. If he does want to do something, he will do it. Case in point, tariffs that we just watched play out in the United States Supreme Court. Just watch that play out in front of our very own eyes. This explanation from Carlson and Kent is complete garbage, in my opinion.
Set off a series of events, meaning the Iranians would retaliate. Now, I think there's a potential there where we could have done several different things. We could have simply said to the Israelis, no, you will not. And if you do, then we will take something away from you. I think that it's fine that we offer defense to Israel, but when we're providing the means for their defense, we get to dictate the terms of when they go on the offensive. Otherwise, they stand to lose that relationship. And the Israelis felt emboldened that no matter what they did, no matter what situation they put us in, that they could go ahead and take this action, and we would just have to react.
But that's just verifiably false. I mean, we watched this unfold early last year when you had the much more active war that was brewing between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Donald Trump, multiple times, called out Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel for their unwillingness to bring this thing to a close. So this notion, this idea that is continually being pushed by people like Tucker Carlson, that any decision that the United States is making is only because of Israel, is just garbage. Is there an outsized influence that AIPAC has on our U.S. government? No question about that. That's not the argument I'm making. But we're not talking about Joe Biden making these decisions. We're talking about Donald Trump, one of the most strongest-willed individuals in modern American politics. If this guy doesn't want to do something, he ain't going to do it. Nobody's going to force him to do it. We know this very clearly. If you have been, Kent says, I supported you in 2016, 2020, and 2024, then you should know pretty clearly that if Donald Trump doesn't want to do something, he's just not going to do it. He doesn't care what the repercussions are. He doesn't care what the optics are. Ooh, if I don't do this, the optics are going to be bad. He doesn't care. That's what makes him so great. That's what so many of us love about him. That's what we appreciate about President Donald Trump, is that he's unlike so many of the individuals that we've seen in politics in the past. He doesn't care what everybody thinks. He's not worried about, is CNN going to write a mean story about me or run a mean story about me on television? Is the Washington Post going to have a mean headline? We don't want that, so I'll make sure I'm not going to do that. He doesn't care. I love it. I absolutely love it. And so this notion, this concept, this idea that Donald Trump seemingly was completely against this, but was backed into the corner by Benjamin Netanyahu, I just don't buy it for a second. Now, can you say that there's influence? Sure. But influence isn't a bad thing. I mean, we have influence in our own lives, in our own circles, every single day. Influence is not a bad thing. At least it inherently is not a bad thing. Can it be used for bad? Absolutely. It absolutely can. And we, of course, have thousands of examples throughout history where it is. But having influence over something, I don't see that as a negative. I don't see that as a bad thing. It can, in fact, turn bad. It can, in fact, be a problem long term, but it does not inherently have to be. And so, again, as I talk about all of the puzzle pieces starting to come together on this, we've now learned that the FBI was probing Kent for leaking classified documents, that he had been cut out of some level of intel briefings over the last couple of months. He releases this letter out of the blue on Tuesday and immediately runs to Tucker Carlson to blame everything that is going on in the Middle East on Israel and claim that Donald Trump, I mean, this is me reading between the lines, but he is claiming that Donald Trump is a weak leader that does not have control over the United States government. That's what he's saying, ladies and gentlemen. And you need to make sure that you understand that. That is the allegation here that Kent is making. Donald Trump does not get to make his own decisions. Benjamin Netanyahu gets to make the decisions for Trump. I don't think that's the case. Knowing everything that I do about President Donald Trump, having watched him very closely over the last decade, again, if he doesn't want to do something, he's just not going to do it. If he does want to do it, he'll do it, regardless of whether it's the best thing or not. He will do it. And so all of these pieces start coming together on this thing, and there's obviously something else going on here. And it's in large part why I've waited a couple of days to talk about this, because I felt very, very confident that we would get some pretty significant updates and news on this Kent situation in the coming days. And well, here, in fact, we've now got that information here on this Thursday. We are going to grab a quick break and reset. Another interesting thing we've seen over the last couple of months is that any time that something controversial happens, we have so-called influencers on the conservative right that immediately jump to, well, Charlie Kirk told me this. Of course, Charlie Kirk is dead, so he can't push back on any of this stuff. It's a very disgusting trend that we're seeing. And well, to no surprise, Joe Kent decided he was going to do that on Tucker Carlson last night. We'll get into those details coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Before that, I want to thank the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the Law Group. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense. If so, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. They're located in downtown Wilmington, and they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online at lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate Melissa Gott and her team over at the Law Group for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. We'll continue as the Nick Craig Show rolls on a Thursday morning, streaming live 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Good Thursday to you, and welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for spending some time here as we continue a very interesting discussion over Joe Kent, who resigned this week. You are well aware of that at this point. He was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, released this scathing letter slamming President Donald Trump and slamming the Trump administration for not having control over their own foreign policy, claiming that the only reason that the United States is involved in conflict with Iran right now is because they are being dog-walked by Israel. And a great comment coming in saying, Kent going on Tucker for the first interview says it all. Tucker is anti-American now for some reason, in parentheses, I think he's drinking again, and has no problem spreading propaganda. That's why I decided to wait a couple of days before I dug into this, because I knew there was more to this story, right? You don't just wake up one Tuesday morning and decide that you're going to put out a public letter on Twitter and slam your boss and resign your position as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And now, of course, we know that Kent, according to the FBI, an FBI probe, has been leaking classified information, probably to Tucker Carlson, if we're being bluntly honest about it, had been cut out of intel briefings because they knew he was leaking and decided that he was going to take the quote-unquote graceful way out, slamming the Trump administration, leaving everything in chaos and ruin, and then run over to Tucker Carlson's show to do an interview there. One thing that I have seen over the last couple of months, and it's a growing concern for those, and it should be for those on the conservative right, is anytime something controversial happens with somebody on the right, they immediately run to a microphone and then try and invoke the name of Charlie Kirk and talk about conversations I had with Charlie, which of course can't be disproven because Charlie Kirk was assassinated in broad daylight by a radical left-wing extremist. And so I will just say this. I find it disgusting that people are doing this. Whether or not you were close with Charlie Kirk or not, but to try and now, after he's been dead for almost a year, bring forward, oh, I had this conversation with him just weeks before he died and was killed, is just nonsense. Stop. If you're so, and obviously Joe Kent is very strong in his opinions, having released this idiotic letter on social media, back it up yourself. Don't bring in dead Charlie Kirk to the conversation to bolster your point as to why you hate the Trump administration. This pisses me off beyond no belief. And of course, he did it on Tucker Carlson last night.
And then, Charlie Kirk is killed publicly in a very horrific way. And we're not really even allowed to look into that at all. And Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors. And he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office in the lead up to the 12-day war. I wasn't particularly close with Charlie. He was very gracious to me when I was running for Congress, very, very supportive. So we knew each other. And the last time I saw Charlie Kirk on this earth was in June in the West Wing, in the stairway. And I said hi to him, and he looked me in the eye, and he said very loudly, and it's a small, you've been in the West Wing, it's small, it's a tight space. And he said, Joe, stop us from getting into a war with Iran. Very loudly.
He was single-minded.
And he walked off.
Of course.
I believe into the Oval.
Of course. And of course, nobody can verify that. Nobody can back that up because, again, Charlie Kirk is dead. However, there is a clip from the Charlie Kirk show that aired right when this situation was unfolding in June of 2025, where he said something very differently. So here's Charlie Kirk's own words on this matter that Joe Kent is apparently remembering all of a sudden right now.
And you might say, Charlie, do you support or oppose this? I support President Trump. That's my answer. I know the man. He's the commander-in-chief. He's the man for the hour, and he's had the weight of the world on his shoulders. So in a situation like this, I support my friend, and he's had my back and I have his. That's my perspective. By the way, I also look at this and I say, and I understand the arguments of people that, don't intervene and all that. I get it. But boy, have we not exhausted so many diplomatic channels and options. Here is Netanyahu, 261.
So there you go. I mean, who's right and who's wrong here? This conversation that apparently happened in the stairwell of the West Wing that nobody can, of course, verify because Charlie Kirk is no longer with us, unfortunately. That's I feel justified in this because I had a conversation with Charlie Kirk, and that's what he told me. Joe, don't let us get into a forever war in the Middle East. I find this to be incredibly disturbing. And you've seen many individuals do this, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, now Joe Kent and others on the political right. Just give it up. Nobody's forcing you to love the Trump administration. I don't care even if you're critical of the Trump administration. I, myself, have been critical of the Trump administration. There's no issue with that. We're allowed to have free thought. One of the things, and I will consistently relay this point until I am no longer given the opportunity to have a microphone in front of my mouth. We have the ability to have free thought on the political right. One of the things that makes the right so drastically different from the political left is free thought, is the ability to have legitimate, intellectual, in some cases, pretty dirty and ugly and nasty disagreements. We allow that stuff. And I'm okay with it. I'm not offended by it. I'm not one of these, everybody just needs to get in line and follow whatever Republicans say. No. I'm a conservative first. I'm a Republican second. So we're allowed to have these disagreements. We're allowed to have free thought. And we shouldn't box each other out for having that. But again, there's a way to go about it and there's a way to not go about it. And the way that Joe Kent decided he was going to go about that this week, it just goes to show you where his head is at. And begs the question, why the hell he was even in this position to start? Who was he leaking classified information to? What sort of state secrets was he leaking, and to who? We need to figure this out. I saw Megyn Kelly jumping into the fray on social media last night. She's all over the place as well, saying that, there's no way, in the United States should not try and look into this Joe Kent situation, and they should not dig into this at all, and nobody should be held accountable. Why not? If Joe Kent was leaking classified information to those that did not have the proper authority to have so, if that's the case, Joe Kent absolutely needs to be held accountable. He absolutely needs to be prosecuted by the greatest strengths within the U.S. government. I don't care where he falls politically. I don't care where his allegiances are. If he decided that he was going to, in his own authority, leak classified information to individuals that shouldn't have access, he should be in prison. It's not because I think Joe Kent is a bad guy. I don't know Joe Kent. I've never met him. I never will meet him. Regardless, we believe in law and order. And of course, in the 2-hour interview that took place on the Tucker Carlson show last night, there was nothing in there about these allegations that he was a leaker. Wink, wink, nod, nod, surprise, surprise. I guess that just didn't make it in the cut, the 2-hour final interview that the Tucker Carlson network released late Wednesday night. Ain't that interesting? Ain't that surprising that this bombshell accusation that he was leaking had been cut out of intel briefings? Gosh darn it. There just wasn't enough time in the 2-hour podcast to have even a 10 or 15, even a 5-minute conversation about that. Ain't that something? Little bit of irony in all of that. So obviously, Joe Kent's allegiance are not with the United States. I, again, don't have anything personally against the guy. Obviously, he doesn't want to be in the position, decided he was going to remove himself from the position. That's his choice, and I will contend to you today that the Trump administration is better off without him. So we'll see as he continues this media parade. I'm very curious to see where this FBI probe goes, and I am a strong believer that he needs to be held accountable if, in fact, he was leaking classified information. It is treason. It is against the law, and it needs to be prosecuted. I don't care where you are, what political aisle, side of the political aisle you're on. I don't care where your allegiances are, whether you're a Trump guy, a Biden guy, a Harris guy. It doesn't matter. Leaking classified information is always a problem. I am morally consistent on this. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative. And if Joe Kent was in fact leaking classified intel, which seems pretty obvious based on some of the FBI sources speaking to Fox News about how he'd been cut out of intel briefings, then I hope he rots in prison, because I don't stand for that. You shouldn't stand for that either. So we'll keep a close eye on this in the coming days and weeks and see what happens with all of this. Very, very unfortunate to see this play out here in the public square and everything associated with that. So we'll keep an eye on this as it continues to play out, as it continues to unfold. He's got his 15 minutes of fame, which maybe is what he was shooting for. And by probably this time next week, we will not be talking about him anymore, and he'll go back to doing whatever he does in private society as no longer a member of the Trump administration. We'll keep an eye on the details right here on the Nick Craig Show. Well, that's going to do it for a Thursday edition. The March Madness tournament starts today, so if you're a college basketball nut, hopefully you enjoy the next couple of weeks. We'll keep track of the North Carolina teams and see how they progress through the tournament, including UNC Chapel Hill and Duke are both playing today. We'll keep an eye on all of those details. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Have a great rest of your Thursday. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.